I should have known. Looking back, I see the little cracks, the tiny, hairline fractures in our perfect life. The way he kissed me goodbye that morning, too quick, too casual. The way he barely looked up from his phone when I told him we'd be back in 2 weeks. The way our housekeeper, Elena, avoided my eyes as she folded the boys' laundry. But I didn't know. Not then. I was too busy herding my 2 sons, Luca and Adrian, into the car, too distracted by the thought of seeing my parents after nearly a year. My husband, Daniel, was supposed to come with us, but work had exploded, as he put it. A last-minute crisis with a business partner. Meetings he couldn't reschedule. He promised he'd fly out in a few days. I believed him. We left for the airport in a rush, the boys chattering excitedly in the back seat, their little voices bouncing off the leather interior of our sleek black SUV. But the city had other plans. Traffic was brutal, bumper to bumper, endless horns, a crawling, suffocating river of cars. By the time we arrived at the airport, our flight had already left. I stood there, staring at the departure board, my stomach sinking. Luca tugged on my sleeve, his blue eyes full of worry. "Mommy, are we still going to Grandpa and Grandma's?" I forced a smile, but my heart was pounding. "Not today, sweetheart. We missed our plane. But we can get another one, right?" Adrian asked. He was younger, barely 5, and the idea of things not going as planned didn't sit well with him. I checked with the airline, but the next available flight wasn't until the following afternoon. Frustrated, exhausted, I made the decision to go home. I texted Daniel, "Missed our flight. Coming back home. See you soon." No reply. Maybe he was in a meeting. Maybe he hadn't seen it. The drive home felt different. I couldn't explain why. The boys had fallen asleep in the back seat, and the quiet gave me too much room to think. Something gnawed at the edges of my mind. A whisper of unease. When we pulled up to the house, it was past 9. The driveway was empty, Daniel's car wasn't there. Maybe he was working late. I ushered the boys inside, their small hands slipping into mine as we made our way upstairs. I tucked them into their beds, kissing their soft cheeks, brushing Luca's dark curls from his forehead. Then, something strange. I walked past the master bedroom to go to the kitchen, but the door was slightly ajar. The dim glow of the bedside lamp seeped into the hallway. Daniel always turned off the lights when he left. I pushed the door open. At first, I didn't understand what I was seeing. Elena. Our housekeeper. Naked in my bed. And Daniel, my husband, hovering over her. The sounds. The scent of perfume that wasn't mine. The tangled sheets. Their frozen expressions. A scream caught in my throat, but I swallowed it. Daniel scrambled back, his face drained of color. "Maya." Elena gasped, yanking the sheets around her body. I stepped into the room, my pulse a deafening roar in my ears. "How long?" My voice was barely a whisper. Neither of them answered. "How long?" Daniel looked away. "Maya, please." "How long?" Elena flinched. 6 months. 6 months. The room tilted. I gripped the dresser to steady myself, bile rising in my throat. Daniel stood there, naked, exposed, not just physically, but in every possible way. The man I built a life with, the father of my children, was nothing more than a liar, a coward. A cheater. And in that moment, something inside me snapped. I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't going to break. I was going to destroy them both. The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. Daniel made a move toward me, but I held up a hand. "Don't," I warned, my voice steady despite the war raging inside me. He stopped, his lips parting as if to say something, but nothing came out. There was nothing to say. No excuse, no justification, no pathetic lie that could undo what I had just seen. Elena sat on the edge of my bed, clutching the sheet against her body, her face pale, her hands trembling. Good. She should be scared. I turned to her, my voice laced with venom. Get out. Maya, please, I said get out. She scrambled out of the bed, hastily gathering her clothes. I watched her stumble toward the door, my eyes burning holes into her back. The moment she was gone, my attention snapped back to Daniel. He was still standing there, naked, a pathetic excuse for a man who had just been caught in the filth of his own betrayal. Put some clothes on, I spat. You disgust me. He grabbed his pants from the floor, pulling them on in silence. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to slap the deceit off his face. But I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing me lose control. When were you going to tell me? I asked, my voice eerily calm. He exhaled, running a hand through his disheveled hair. Maya, it wasn't. Don't lie to me, Daniel. Not now. He hesitated, and then, I wasn't. Honesty. Too late, but there it was. My heart cracked, but I refused to let it shatter. I nodded slowly. So, you were just going to keep sneaking around, sleeping with her in our bed while I took care of our children? While I trusted you? He had the audacity to look ashamed, but I saw it for what it was, regret for getting caught, not for what he had done. I didn't mean for it to happen. I let out a bitter laugh. Oh, spare me. You didn't fall into her, Daniel. You made a choice. Over and over again. He opened his mouth, but I held up a hand. I don't want to hear it. I don't care why you did it. I don't care about your pathetic justifications. Here's what's going to happen now. His brows furrowed. Maya. You're going to pack a bag, and you're going to leave. Tonight. His jaw tightened. This is my house too. I smiled, a slow, dangerous smile. Actually, it's not. His face paled. I tilted my head, enjoying the moment. Did you forget, darling? The house is in my name. I paid for it. I handle the finances. You're a guest here, and as of tonight, you've overstayed your welcome. Maya, come on. The boys. The boys will be just fine without their cheating father setting an example for them. His nostrils flared. You're being vindictive. I laughed, shaking my head. No, Daniel. I'm being fair. You made your bed, literally, and now you get to lie in the consequences. For the first time since I caught him, something flickered in his eyes, panic. Good. He looked toward the hallway, probably thinking about Luca and Adrian asleep in their rooms, oblivious to the destruction happening downstairs. Don't do this, Maya. Please. I scoffed. You did this. Not me. He was breathing harder now, his frustration mounting. What do you want? Money? You want the house? Fine, take it. But don't. I took a step closer, cutting him off. I don't want anything from you. I don't need anything from you. My voice dropped to a whisper, but it held more power than any scream. I just want you gone. The weight of my words settled over him. He swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing, and then he nodded slowly. I'll pack a bag, he murmured. I stepped aside, giving him space to pass. He moved toward the closet, grabbing shirts, jeans, whatever his shaking hands could reach. I watched him in silence, arms crossed, my heart a solid block of ice. As he zipped up his duffel bag, he turned back to me, one last, desperate attempt in his eyes. Maya. I'm sorry. I stared at him for a long moment. Then, I turned and walked away. I stood at the top of the staircase, listening to the sound of his duffel bag sliding across the hardwood floor as he walked toward the front door. Every step felt like the end of something. But I wasn't mourning. I was planning. He paused at the threshold, his hand on the doorknob. Can we talk about this later? I laughed, an actual, genuine laugh. The audacity. Daniel, you lost the right to talk to me about us the moment you let her into our bed. His shoulders slumped, and for the briefest moment, I almost felt sorry for him. But then I remembered the months of deceit. The lies. The fact that if I hadn't missed my flight, he would still be here, still lying to my face. Goodbye, Daniel, I said firmly. He hesitated, then stepped out into the night. The door shut behind him with a satisfying click. And just like that, my marriage was over. But my revenge? My revenge was just beginning. Step 1, Elena. I turned and walked back upstairs, my blood still simmering with rage. My children were asleep, innocent and unaware, but I wouldn't allow them to live under the same roof as a woman who had betrayed us. Elena was still here. I found her in the guest bedroom, shoving clothes into a suitcase, her hands shaking so badly that she fumbled with the zipper. Maya, please, she whispered, tears pooling in her wide brown eyes. I never wanted this to happen. Then you shouldn't have let it. She flinched, her fingers tightening around the suitcase handle. You lived in my home. You took care of my children. And this is how you repaid me? I stepped closer, forcing her to meet my eyes. 6 months, Elena. You carried on with him for 6 months while smiling in my face, while tucking my boys into bed. How do you live with yourself? Her lips trembled, but I didn't care for her tears. I trusted you, I continued, my voice unwavering. I welcomed you into my family. And you took everything I gave you and threw it away for a cheap affair. She shook her head. He told me you two were unhappy. I let out a breathless, bitter laugh. Of course he did. That's what they all say, isn't it? I tilted my head. Did he promise you anything? Love? A future? Did you really think you'd replace me? Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks, but I had no sympathy left to give. You have 5 minutes, I said coldly. Get out of my house. She swallowed, nodding frantically as she yanked her suitcase off the bed. She barely looked at me as she rushed past, heading for the front door. I followed her, watching as she stumbled out onto the porch. And Elena? I called as she reached the driveway. She turned, eyes filled with fear. Don't ever come near my family again. With that, I slammed the door in her face. Throwing them both out was only the beginning. Daniel needed to understand what he had lost. He needed to feel the weight of his mistakes, the humiliation, the downfall. And I knew exactly how to make that happen. I walked into the home office, sat down at his desk, and turned on his computer. I had access to everything, his emails, his work documents, even his private accounts. He had always trusted me to manage the household, the finances, the day-to-day operations of our lives. Now, that trust would be his undoing. I opened his email and composed a message. Subject, urgent business matter, Daniel's conduct. Dear CEO's name. I wanted to bring something to your attention regarding Daniel's recent behavior. As his wife, it pains me to say this, but I feel a moral obligation to disclose the truth. Daniel has been engaging in an inappropriate relationship with our housekeeper for the past 6 months, during business hours, while working from home, and even during company trips. I have collected evidence, should you require it. I trust the company values professionalism and integrity, and I leave it in your hands to address this matter accordingly. Sincerely. Maya, last name. I hovered over the send button for a brief second, then clicked. That was one problem taken care of. But I wasn't done. I opened his social media accounts next. His LinkedIn, his Facebook. I changed his statuses. Daniel, last name, is no longer married. He was caught cheating with the housekeeper. Please respect his privacy during this difficult time. I posted it. I wasn't looking for sympathy. I wasn't looking for validation. I was making sure that everyone, his colleagues, his friends, his business partners, knew exactly what kind of man he was. And then, for the finishing touch, I took our wedding photo off the mantelpiece, snapped it in half, and tossed it into the fireplace. I watched as the flames curled around the edges, consuming the lies, the betrayal, the memories. Let him burn, too. By the next morning, my phone was flooded with messages. From friends, from mutual acquaintances, from Daniel himself. Daniel, Maya, what the hell did you do? Daniel, you're ruining me. Daniel, call me. I didn't. Instead, I made an appointment with the best divorce attorney in the city. How fast can we make this happen? I asked, sitting across from a sharp-eyed woman in a navy blue suit. She smiled. That depends. Do you want to play nice? Or do you want to make him suffer? I leaned back in my chair, a slow smirk curling my lips. Let's make him suffer. I always thought heartbreak would feel like drowning, gasping for air, fighting against the weight pulling you under. But this was different. I wasn't drowning. I was on fire. And Daniel? He was about to burn with me. The morning after I sent those emails and social media updates, the phone calls started. First, from Daniel. I ignored them. Then, from his mother. I ignored her too. Finally, a call from an unfamiliar number. Mrs., last name, this is Mr. Chambers from Daniel's company. I'd like to discuss the email you sent last night. I smiled. Of course, Mr. Chambers. What would you like to know? There was a pause. Is there evidence? Oh, plenty, I said sweetly. He exhaled sharply. I see. I knew exactly what was happening. Daniel was a high-ranking executive at his firm, and his spotless image had just been dragged through the mud. Companies don't like scandals. Investors like them even less. How do you wish to proceed? I asked. Another pause. We'll be conducting an internal review. But I assure you, Mrs., last name, we take matters of professional misconduct very seriously. That was all I needed to hear. I thanked him, hung up, and leaned back in my chair, feeling a satisfaction I hadn't felt in months. Daniel had underestimated me. Now, he would pay for it. By noon, my front door was rattling under Daniel's furious pounding. Maya, open the door. I took my time, straightening my robe before walking to the entrance. I pulled it open just enough to see his face, red with anger, eyes wild. You're insane, he hissed. Do you have any idea what you've done? I tilted my head, feigning confusion. Oh. Did your boss call? His jaw clenched. They put me on leave while they investigate. Do you know what that means? It means I could lose everything. I folded my arms, unimpressed. You should have thought about that before you decided to sleep with the help. He let out a bitter laugh. You're punishing me for something that wasn't serious. I raised an eyebrow. Wasn't serious? She meant nothing, he shouted. It was just sex. But you? You're trying to ruin me. For a second, I just stared at him. Then I smiled. A slow, dangerous smile. Oh, Daniel, I whispered. You ruined yourself. He was breathing hard now, frustration radiating off him. You think this is over? You think you can just kick me out, humiliate me, and walk away? I met his furious gaze with calm certainty. I don't think I can. I know I can. He exhaled sharply, rubbing his hands over his face. You're making a mistake, Maya. No, I said. The only mistake I made was trusting you. I stepped back, gripping the edge of the door. And I don't make the same mistake twice. Then I slammed it in his face. An hour later, I was sitting across from my lawyer again, going over the details of our case. Here's what we have, she said, flipping through her notes. The house is in your name. The bank accounts are joint, but you have documentation proving you contributed more financially. Your prenup. I want full custody, I interrupted. She looked up, studying me. With visitation? I shook my head. No. Maya. She sighed. Judges don't usually deny a father access to his kids unless there's evidence of harm. He's moving in with her, I said flatly. A woman who had no problem sleeping with a married man, lying to his children's mother, and breaking up a family. What kind of influence is that? She tapped her pen against the desk, considering. We can argue it. It's not a guaranteed win, but it's possible. I nodded. Do it. And the finances? I leaned back, my expression cold. I want everything I'm entitled to. Child support, spousal support, half of everything he owns. I don't care if he walks away with nothing but the clothes on his back. She smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. Elena was still working at our house when I caught her. That meant she still relied on her paycheck. Which meant I had leverage. I drove straight to the cleaning agency that had hired her, walked into the office, and requested to speak to the manager. 30 minutes later, Elena no longer had a job. The manager was very interested to hear about the unprofessional relationship she had engaged in with my husband while on the clock. By the time I left, Elena had been officially terminated. And I wasn't done yet. She had no home now. She had no job. And I had a final gift for her. I sent her a text. Maya, you might want to check with Daniel before assuming you have a place to stay. Good luck, sweetheart. Because while I was in his email last night, I had seen something interesting. Daniel hadn't been planning on leaving me for her. In fact, he had already started seeing someone else on the side. Elena wasn't the affair. She was just one of them. I sent her screenshots. She read them within seconds. Then I blocked her. By the time Daniel figured out what I had done, it was too late. His company was still investigating him. His accounts had been frozen as part of the divorce. Elena had cut ties with him after realizing she wasn't his only side piece. And me? I was untouchable. The final straw came 3 weeks later when the court awarded me primary custody of the kids, full ownership of the house, and generous financial support. Daniel showed up at my door again that night. But this time, there was no shouting. No anger. Just a broken man standing on my porch. Maya, he whispered. I lost everything. I met his eyes, once so familiar, now just hollow shadows of the man I used to love. That makes two of us, I said softly. Then, without another word, I closed the door. And this time, I didn't look back. Revenge was done. The damage was irreversible. Daniel had lost everything, his job, his reputation, his mistress. He had been reduced to a ghost of the man he once was, wandering through life with no real purpose. And me? I was free. But this wasn't just about winning. This was about rebuilding. About turning the wreckage of my marriage into the foundation for something stronger. Moving forward. The first thing I did was change the locks. Not because I thought Daniel would come back, he wouldn't dare, but because I wanted a fresh start. No remnants of his betrayal lingering in the walls of my home. I threw out our old sheets, the pillows we had once shared. I replaced the bedding with crisp, clean linens that smelled of lavender and peace. I repainted the bedroom a deep emerald green, my favorite color, not his. The house was mine. The life was mine. For the first time in years, I felt like me again. Daniel's downward spiral. I didn't check on Daniel. I didn't ask mutual friends about him. But updates found their way to me nonetheless. He was living in a cheap apartment on the other side of town, struggling to find work after his scandal had made its way through the corporate world. His savings were dwindling thanks to the hefty financial settlement I had secured. And Elena? She never took him back. I heard she moved back to her home country after being unable to find stable work. No job, no Daniel, no future. Poetic justice. A new beginning. One day, about 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I took Luca and Adrian to a small cafe near the park. They were laughing, fighting over who got to eat the last bite of cake, their faces covered in frosting. And then, I saw him. Not Daniel. Someone else. He was sitting alone at a table by the window, a book in one hand, a coffee in the other. He was handsome, not in an intimidating, flashy way, but in a quiet, confident way. And when he looked up and met my gaze, something in me shifted. A slow, knowing smile spread across his lips. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something that wasn't anger, wasn't betrayal, wasn't sadness. I felt possibility. I wasn't looking for love. I wasn't looking for anything, really, just peace, stability, and the quiet joy of raising my sons without the shadow of Daniel's betrayal hanging over me. But life has a funny way of surprising you. The stranger at the cafe. I glanced away after our eyes met, my heart doing an unfamiliar flutter. It had been so long since I'd felt noticed, truly seen, and not as someone's wife, someone's mother, someone's discarded past. Luca and Adrian continued their playful argument over the last bite of cake, oblivious to the way my world had tilted ever so slightly. "Excuse me," a warm voice said. I looked up, and there he was, standing at the edge of my table, his book tucked under one arm, a curious smile playing on his lips. "I don't mean to intrude," he continued, nodding toward my boys, "but I think your little warriors could use a neutral mediator." I blinked, surprised, before glancing at Luca and Adrian. They had paused mid-bicker, staring up at the stranger with wide, curious eyes. Adrian spoke first. "What's a mediator?" "It's someone who helps settle a fair agreement when two strong opponents are at a standstill," he explained. "And judging by the intensity of this debate, I'd say the fairest solution is..." He paused dramatically. "A second slice of cake." Both boys gasped. "Mom?" Luca turned to me with a hopeful expression. I sighed, shaking my head but unable to suppress a smile. "You're going to get me in trouble." The stranger chuckled. "It's my specialty." For the first time in forever, I laughed, really laughed. And just like that, something inside me softened. His name was Adam. We talked for a while. His name was Adam. He was a lawyer, a good one, he teased, not the kind who defended sleazy businessmen like my ex-husband. He had moved to the city a year ago after a difficult divorce of his own. "You're divorced?" I asked, stirring my coffee. 2 years, he admitted, leaning back in his chair. She wasn't who I thought she was. It took me a while to accept that. I studied him, sensing the weight behind his words. "I understand that more than I'd like to." His eyes met mine, something knowing flickering in their depths. "Yeah," he murmured. "I figured you might." It was strange, this connection, easy, effortless, like we had skipped the awkward small talk and gone straight into something real. I wasn't ready for love. But maybe, just maybe, I was ready for this. Meanwhile, Daniel was crumbling. I didn't ask about Daniel. But, as always, news found its way to me. Apparently, his work prospects had dried up. His reputation was too tarnished to land anything near his former status. The last I heard, he had moved out of his expensive apartment and was renting a small, unimpressive place on the outskirts of town. He had been dating here and there, but nothing serious. No woman was willing to deal with a man who had publicly humiliated his wife, lost his career, and burned every bridge in his life. One evening, my phone buzzed with a message. "Daniel, I miss the boys. Can I see them this weekend?" I sighed. He had visitation rights, but he hadn't been consistent about showing up. Me, if you can actually commit to a weekend, yes. But I'm not going to keep letting them get their hopes up just for you to cancel. There was a long pause before he replied. Daniel, I'll be there. For their sake, I hoped he meant it. Healing, one step at a time. Days turned into weeks. I kept seeing Adam, nothing serious, nothing rushed. Coffee dates. Walks in the park. Simple conversations that reminded me I was still me, not just the woman Daniel had left behind. One evening, as I stood in the doorway of my son's bedroom, watching them sleep, I realized something. I had survived. Not just the betrayal. Not just the heartbreak. I had survived myself, the version of me who had once believed she couldn't live without Daniel, who had feared she wasn't enough. And now? I was thriving. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't just living in the ruins of my past. I was building something new. Something better. And I couldn't wait to see where it led. Healing wasn't a straight line. Some days, I felt unstoppable, like I had conquered the worst, and nothing could touch me. Other days, I still felt the ghost of Daniel's betrayal lingering in the shadows, whispering doubts I thought I had buried. But every time those thoughts crept in, I reminded myself. I was no longer that woman. I was free. And I was ready to start living again. A second chance at something real. Adam and I kept things slow. I didn't introduce him to Luca and Adrian right away. We had coffee, we took walks, we talked for hours about everything, his past, my past, what we wanted from the future. He wasn't pushy. He didn't try to rush me into something I wasn't ready for. And maybe that's what made him different. One afternoon, as we sat on a park bench, watching the autumn leaves swirl around us, he turned to me with a small smile. I like you, Maya. I felt warmth spread through me, cautious but undeniable. I like you too. He studied me, as if searching for something in my expression. But? I sighed, hugging my coat tighter around me. But I'm scared. He nodded, understanding. Because of him. Because of me, I admitted. Because I ignored the signs before. Because I trusted Daniel, and I was so wrong about him. And I don't know if I can trust myself again. Adam was quiet for a moment before he spoke. You don't have to trust me yet. But trust yourself, Maya. Trust that you've grown. That you see things clearer now. That you won't ignore the signs this time. I looked at him, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was on the verge of making a mistake. I felt like I was making a choice. A choice for me. Meanwhile, Daniel was falling apart. He showed up for his first weekend visit with the boys. I let them go to his tiny apartment, watching from the doorway as he awkwardly greeted them. Lucas seemed hesitant, Adrian even more so. I knew why. Daniel had missed too much. He had disappointed them too many times. Kids are resilient, but they remember. And they didn't trust him the way they once had. When they came home Sunday night, Luca barely spoke about it. Adrian just said, Daddy doesn't have much food at his house. That stung. Daniel had once lived in luxury. Now he could barely provide snacks for his own children. It should have made me feel triumphant. Instead, it just made me feel done. Done worrying about him. Done wondering if he regretted it. I didn't need his downfall to validate my worth. I had already won. Introducing Adam. Months passed. Slowly, carefully, I let Adam into my life. And then, one day, it felt right. I sat Luca and Adrian down after dinner. There's someone I want you to meet. Luca squinted at me. Is it a boyfriend? Adrian gasped dramatically. Mommy has a boyfriend? I laughed. He's just a friend right now. But he's really nice, and I think you'll like him. They exchanged glances. Luca shrugged. Okay. Adrian frowned. Does he like superheroes? He loves superheroes. That was enough for him. And just like that, I took another step forward. The final confrontation. I hadn't seen Daniel face to face in months, but that changed one evening when he showed up at my door. Adam had just left after dinner. Luca and Adrian were asleep. I almost didn't open it. But I did. Daniel looked terrible. His once pristine suits had been replaced with a wrinkled jacket and jeans that hung too loose on him. There were dark circles under his eyes, and for the first time in his life, he looked tired. "Is something wrong?" I asked, my voice calm. He let out a bitter laugh. "Everything's wrong, Maya." I said nothing. Just waited. He ran a hand through his unkempt hair, exhaling. "I lost my job. No one will hire me. I barely have enough to pay rent. I screwed up. I know that." I crossed my arms. "And what do you want from me, Daniel?" He looked at me then, and for the briefest moment, I saw something real in his eyes. Regret. "I miss you," he whispered. "I miss us." I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel pain. I just felt nothing. "Daniel," I said softly, "there is no us." He swallowed. "I know, but..." "No," I cut him off gently. "You don't know. If you did, you wouldn't be here. You wouldn't be saying these things to me now, after everything. You're not here because you love me. You're here because you lost." His face crumpled slightly. "That's not true." "It is," I said, my voice steady. "And I'm not your safety net." He was silent. I exhaled, stepping back. "Goodbye, Daniel." And this time, when I closed the door, it stayed closed. A new beginning. One evening, as Adam and I sat on my porch, watching the sunset, he reached for my hand. I let him take it. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded. For the first time in a long time, yeah. And I meant it. Daniel was my past. But my future? It was mine. And it had never looked brighter.